music playing and let everybody in here. Thanks for joining us. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, October 3rd. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And before I even jump into the program tonight, I just want to say hi to Ed Cottrell. We were worried about you, Ed, on Monday night. So anybody who may have mentioned it or heard Todd mention it, I know that you were in the path of Helene, and we were definitely fretting there for a couple days, hoping you're okay. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. The whole area is a disaster area. Within all around Interstate 40 is all out of commission. Asheville's leveled. Most of our electricity and water is back on now. So I would say 80% of the people are in good shape. We still have a lot of people that are in the mountains that they're dropping food and drink by helicopter, and we have 1,000 federal troops in both cities, so to prevent any looting or anything like that. But I'm fine. My biggest problem was keeping my hearing aid batteries charged. I had to sit by a charger for 14 hours to charge my batteries so I could hear.
Boy, I bet you wish you would have stayed in the UK, right?
Yeah, it would have been much easier, believe me.
No
But
doubt.
it's okay. And so what I went through is nothing to what some of these people are going through. And everybody just say a prayer for them because they're going to need all the help they can get.
Absolutely, Ed. And we are very, very fortunate to see you back here. So thank you so much for even spending the time now, knowing how difficult it is down there, just coming on and seeing your face is, I'm sure, relief to a lot of everyone here.
I've been looking forward to this tonight because it gives me something to do besides sitting and twiddling my thumbs. I get to look at people's pictures and watch faces and listen to the program. So you won't hear from me anymore. I'll just sit here and watch and enjoy the program. And thanks everybody for worrying about me.
I think Glenn might have some pics of you, which we may get to a little later in the program. For those of you who are joining us, maybe new, we are the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Tonight's program, Greatest Generation Live, is hosted by our very own Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Back in the USA, as they say, right? And the Beatles song that was other country. That was back in USSR. It's nice to be back. It's great to be back on the program. We had a wonderful time in England. I see some of my fellow travelers on the program. Thank you guys so much for coming with us. It was a blast. It just was more than I expected. Seldom are your expectations, not only not fulfilled, but over fulfilled. So it was great.
Well, that's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear. Absolutely. But it's great to have you back as well, Glenn, and everybody else that was on the trip. And I agree, Ben. I heard that Ed was a rock star on the England trip. So I'm excited to hear more about it as we go along.
Yeah, I'd like to start with showing everybody some of the photos we have of Ed. If we could start there just for a couple of minutes. Can I take the screen, Sean?
Let me go ahead and make you co-host, and you will do that in just a second. Okay, there you go.
Okay. See if I can remember how to do this. It's been a while.
Little out of practice.
Yeah.
Well, while you're pulling it up, everyone, we'd invite you to check out our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. You can read this great article, the World War II veteran Ed Cottrell visits England. We put that up recently. You can also, up the top, you see there is membership. You can become a member of the VBC. All of our programs are free. But if you become a member, that helps support the VBC. It's $36 a year. We invite you to become a member, but thank you.
So are you seeing Ed there in the cockpit of that P-47?
We are.
So on that Saturday of the Battle of Britain show, we went up to RAF Lakenheath, which was the air base where Ed's old fighter squadron is based. They just treated us royally. They treated Ed as the ultimate royal. Had a P-47 sitting there waiting for him, along with a P-51. And in between was an F-35. So a rather interesting picture. And Ed just jumped right into that cockpit like it was 1944. And just a few shots of him I'll show. Ed, what did that feel like?
It was absolutely fantastic. I was, as soon as I sat in there, it brought back a lot of memories. But for best of all, I recognized exactly where everything was in that cockpit.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah. That's had to be just the thrill, real thrill after so many years.
80 years since I sat in one of those.
80 years. Holy Toledo. And this was I think this was the colonel in charge of the squadron, Shooter Sansom. They all had these great nicknames, Crush, Shooter, whatever.
Glenn, I'm not getting any of the pictures, so I can't tell what you're doing.
Oh, I'm not sure why. Is everybody else seeing the pictures? Yeah. I'm not sure why you're not, Ed, but I've got a picture up here of you with Shooter looking at the side of that F-35.
Shooter was the commanding officer of the 48th, and I'll tell you, those young men look up to him, and every one of them said what a great pilot he is and a great leader. And when I look at those 30 pilots, I know our country's in good hands with people like that.
Here's this picture at the bottom. I'm showing the picture with you and all those pilots in front of the F-35, which we had to work real hard not to get Ed to fly that thing. He wanted to fly that F-35. Just a little faster than the P-47, but
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. And then just a great shot here of many shots we had of Ed talking to these young pilots. And to me, it was just fascinating. I mean, what are they, 4 generations or so younger than Ed? Yet the connection with Ed was immediate because they're fighter pilots, even though separated by 80 years. And it was just a wonderful, 3 or 4 hours we spent there. And they treated us so well, had that 47 and 51 there. And then we got to see the 47 and 51 take off. Here's Ed in the little vehicles they had. They took us all out to the flight line and we watched the 47 and 51 take off, which was pretty thrilling as well. That sound was fantastic, wasn't it, Ed?
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
So to listen to that 47 rev that engine up was like music to my ears. And when he took off, he was pretty gentle taking that thing off.
Is that right? Gentle.
Yeah.
What do you mean by gentle?
It could have gotten off a lot faster than he took it off.
Well, he didn't have any Germans chasing him, so maybe.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Plus, he was taken off of a concrete runway, whereas you took off from grass fields for the most part.
Yeah, there were metal strips.
Metal strips, yeah. So for everybody else that wasn't there, that was, to me, the highlight of the trip, although there were many highlights. And Todd and I are working on a little pictorial highlight strip, if you will, to send out here in the next week or so. The other highlight to me was, and I'll stop talking about the trip, was the visit on the Monday to the 100th Bomb Group Air Base at Thorpe Abbotts. I see Doug nodding his head. Doug and I almost cried as we walked around that control tower. You know, just to walk in the footsteps of the men that were there that we've read about, heard about. And of course, in Lucky Luckadoo's case, we were fortunate enough to know Lucky Luckadoo, and he was on that tower. So what a thrill. And did anybody else that was on the trip want to make a quick comment? If you do, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Terry?
So I was riding in the van, sitting behind Ed. He was sitting in the bench seat behind shotgun when we went to Lakenheath. And we rounded the corner and there was the P-47. When they opened the van door, Ed slid from his seat down to the floor of the van, from the floor of the van to the step on the van, and popped right up like that 20-something-year-old pilot back in the day. And I just saw a dramatic change in him going from the 102-year-old Ed to that pilot back in World War II. And it was just quite the transformation and so cool to see. And I don't know who was more excited, Ed, seeing the P-47, or all those pilots seeing Ed and that walking history. It was just so cool.
Yeah, you could see the expression on those young men's faces. It was one of awe, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else from the trip? Well, we'll move on. Oh, yes, I see a hand. Jerry.
What I really loved was when we went to the 95th Bomb Group, and the people was just so nice. And they went into the records and they got my uncle's picture of his 10 men that flew on his B-17. He was a ball turret gunner, and it was just amazing how wonderful they were toward us, giving us all that, and never forget that. It was a once in a lifetime trip. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Jerry, for coming, and it was a blast. Everybody had a good time. Okay.
Ben Wright. Oh, Ben Wright had his hand up.
Ben?
You bet. Hey, well, a great thanks to both Glenn and Todd, especially Glenn, for organizing the trip. And even though we had a very busy itinerary, it was amazing how many things we saw, and how great it was and how well received we were. And we were thrilled that everywhere except for one place, it was an exception, that everyone honored Ed. And we were so delighted that he was able to go with us. And it was indeed a trip of a lifetime. So thank you to everybody that went, and to Glenn in particular for organizing it.
My honor, my pleasure. And we're going to start organizing our next trip very soon. So we'll do it again next year, although a slightly different context, a very different context, actually. So. Okay, we need to move on just because we have a long story to tell tonight about Operation Market Garden. I've got 3 co-hosts with me tonight to help me out with this. You know them all. They've done this sort of with me before in a couple of other programs. We've got Ken Kaszak. Ken, say hello.
Good evening.
Ken is our resident A Bridge Too Far movie buff. And he's going to give us some background on the movie. We've got Colin Heaton, who's with us often. Colin, thank you for being here. And Colin's going to be talking about several things, but mostly covering the German side. I'm going to kind of be the Allied side and Colin the German side. I took the Allied side because I like to win, and I kind of knew who won. So I feel good about my chances. And Greg Yoest. Greg, say hello.
Hello.
Okay. And
strategery, big strategery. So
strategical. He's going to do that. It's an interesting couple of old words that we don't use anymore. Strategery and strategical. So we're going to watch. This is sort of the 80th anniversary of Operation Market Garden, a few weeks too late because we weren't here in September. And we're going to do quite a few 80th anniversary programs over the next 8 or 9 months. Next week, we're going to do the 81st anniversary of Black Week for the 100th Bomb Group, really featuring Harry Crosby and Ev Blakely on the the Bremen mission, where they had such an incredible journey and almost didn't make it, but make it back. And it's recounted in a mission report that we've published on our website. It'll be published again in the bulletin on Monday, a mission report that Harry Crosby wrote. And then 40 years later, it appears in his book, A Wing and a Prayer, as chapter 10 of that book. And if you can read that mission report or read chapter 10 of his book, it's a great setup for what we'll be doing next week. So without any further ado, let's get into Operation Market Garden. So I'm going to bring up this PowerPoint. We've got a couple of PowerPoints for you, and we'll get into Operation Market Garden. Slideshow and play from start. How you like that, Sean, for having not been here for the past 4 weeks? Huh? Bravo. Yeah. So we're actually, again, as like I said, a few weeks late. Operation Market Garden was in mid-September of 1944, based on the book, very closely related to the book, A Bridge Too Far by Cornelius Ryan, the well-known Cornelius Ryan. He wrote The Longest Day and a couple of other books, which the names don't quite come to mind right now, but he's really famous for The Longest Day and A Bridge Too Far. Two phrases which have, stuck in history. Although The Longest Day wasn't his phrase, he just borrowed that one from Rommel. And actually, A Bridge Too Far comes from an historical character as well. And of course, if I can get my slideshow going here, the movie. So the movie came out in what year, Ken? 1977?
June of 77.
June of 77. I've seen it so many times. It's like 12 o'clock high. I've got it memorized. You can just show me a clip. I can tell you, what it was. These are some of the movie posters that came out. And at this point, we were going to ask Ken to give us a little background on the making of the movie. Because the other part of this is that if you've seen the movie, it is very, very historically accurate. Not 100%, but certainly in the 90% historically accurate.
So, but I want to give a quick background on Cornelius Ryan. Interesting character, as I learned. Born in Ireland, flew 14 bombing missions with the 8th and 9th Army Air Force, embedded with George Patton until the end of the European War, transferred to the Pacific Theater until the end of that war. So I think in the 1960s, he started keeping notes for this book. And in the special features of the DVD, every source, he had 2 sources. Every item he put into the book, he had 2 sources. So he was battling cancer while he was writing this book. He had a friendship with movie producer Joseph E. Levine. Levine encouraged him to finish the book. Book gets published in November of 74. Cornelius Ryan dies 2 months later. And Joseph E. Levine paid Cornelius Ryan's widow sum of money to get the film rights. And the great quote that I got from Cornelius Ryan is, "What I write about is not war, but the courage of man." So here's Levine, who we probably saw 400 titles to his credit, including The Graduate, The Lion in Winter, and The Producers. And Levine just wanted to do this. He hired William Goldman, who wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and was fresh off of All the President's Men, to write the screenplay. And even Goldman said, "Why do you want to do this?" And Levine said, "I'm 75 years old and this is what I want to do." So Levine hired Richard Attenborough to direct it. And Attenborough only had 2 movies under his belt, but Levine said he's going to be my man. No, the movie or the actor that Attenborough wanted was his good friend Steve McQueen. They appeared in The Great Escape together and also in The Sand Pebbles. and McQueen turned down the role of Julian Moore, which went to Robert Redford. And the actors were paid handsomely. 1977, they were paid $125,000. I'm sorry, $250,000 per week, and they all wanted paid up front. And Levine was able to come up with the money and a budget of $25 million, and shooting started. No pun intended.
Okay. Anything else, Ken, about the movie?
Well, you know, the movie actually started production. It took 133 days to shoot the movie. And if you think about it, it was 1977. Some of the military equipment, the tanks were used by other countries for their defense. So they were able to round those up. Some tanks were fiberglass replicas of tank tops on Volkswagen Beetle chassis. And in Arnhem, by the way, which is obviously the center point of the movie, Arnhem was too modern by 1977. So they used a town close by called Deventer. So with the scenes that you see with Anthony Hopkins playing John Frost, whatever is, you know, filmed in Deventer. So $25 million budget, $50 million at the box office, which at the time was the 6th highest reward. And I just saw that somebody popped up there. This is the second movie about Operation Market Garden. The first one is a Dutch movie called Theirs is the Glory from 1946. And one last note, like Glenn, I've seen the movie many times. I went to Arnhem in December, and I came back and I rewatched the movie, and it was a joy again. It was like watching a fresh movie like watching it for the first time.
And the lineup of stars, you know, just reading off this one poster: Dirk Bogarde, James Caan, Michael Caine, Sean Connery, Edward Fox, Elliot Gould, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins. I don't know who Hartley Kruger is. Laurence Olivier, Ryan O'Neal, Robert Redford, Maximilian Schell. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, I don't think you can do that today. You can't line up 15, you know, stars like that unless you got $1 billion, I guess.
I think anybody who was anybody in the movie business at the time was in it. And I guess an actor like Ryan O'Neal, who was relatively young, General Gavin was 37 years old, I believe, at the time. So that was, you know, that was good casting, perfect casting.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Ken. And let's get into now the actual story of Operation Market Garden. Greg, did you want me to start with these maps and then we go to your PowerPoint?
Well, okay, yeah, we can go through these really quickly, and then we'll go back to my slides, and then come back to these, because I think they sort of bookend the story. So yes, sure. This is obviously the invasion of Normandy. And you know, June 6th, and friendly reminder here that to the right of our screen there, to the east, that's where the British and Canadians were, right? Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. And the U.S. landed at Utah and Omaha. That pattern stayed with it. When you think about this, we're going to see this pattern stay with it. If you think about the British and Canadians coming ashore and making a left turn and going up the coast of France, in the United States, I think it's on the next slide, sort of basically goes due south, first of all, right? So looks a little strange to liberate France, to get into Germany. The first thing you do is go due south. Now, this took quite a while, and part of the just took quite a while to get out of Normandy, and there was an idiotic move by Hitler, an idiotic defense at a place called Falaise, where he sort of just wasted a brilliant he wasted a defense pattern that allowed the U.S., especially the U.S., to get out going south. U.S. Third Army there, as you can see, is as I think most of the people in here would recognize, was commanded by General George S. Patton, who then the bulk of his army takes that turn across France where it says Le Mans, and then they sort of just start darting across France in the summer, August up into September of 44. So I don't know, is this the last of the Normandy slides? Should we go to sort of my little thing here?
If I can just make one comment, because it's historically interesting. So the original plan was for Patton's Third Army to come down here and not turn east. The original plan was for them to turn west and take all of Brittany, right? Why? Because they wanted these ports, Saint Malo, Brest, Lorient, Saint Nazaire, right? And once they got down here and realized a couple of things. One, they could resupply reasonably well over the beaches. And two, the German army was falling apart. And as Greg said, there's this pocket that developed right in here. I don't have the name on it, but the city of Falaise is right in here, right below Argentan. And we almost captured the entire German army there. Came within a few days of maybe containing them all. Didn't move quite fast enough. There were some misunderstandings between the British and Canadians to the north and us to the south. And, you know, sort of like, I'll say 25–30% of the German army still got away to Paris. So anyway, just a little historical background, how things changed on the fly, which the Americans were very good at. So this is the front now, more like September of 44.
Right, this is the front, and you can see it sort of gets up to the German border, and it's not static because both armies, the British Canadians in the north and the U.S. in the south, or center, for lack of a better term, are still on the move. Right, they're still going forward. But the question becomes, which way do you go? Are you going to devote your efforts to the north or to the center? But at this point, I want to go back, maybe if you can start my slides here, because there's something at the very beginning of the movie that seems like quote unquote Hollywood hype, but it was not. And if you okay, so let's see, my slides,
go ahead.
If my slides come up here, I wish we could show the clip from the movie. For a variety of reasons you can't. So this is sort of, you know, the grand strategic situation. So we're taking the really big world picture here. So you can go to the next one there, and go to the next slide. This is from the movie. It's I guess it's the opening scene. There's a voiceover narration of where the war was at this point, late summer 44. And this narrator, and it's in a woman's voice, so it's clearly sort of not designed to be part of the actual action of the movie, you know. And you can read that there, like so many plans to end the fighting by Christmas and bring the boys home. That seems like, in the movie, that seems like Hollywood hype. That was not. If you go to the next slide there, you can start to see how things had changed in the 2 years. The upper one is the situation in 42, where you see the Germans and Nazis, the whole Axis empire all over Europe. By the late summer of 44, unfortunately, I couldn't get a map with red in there, but you see the US and the British have largely liberated France. They're most of the way up Italy. Look how close the Russians have come compared to where they were 2 summers before. They're basically on the outskirts of Warsaw, which I won't get into that because that's an interesting thing there. So look how things had changed in that situation, and the Allies were still advancing, pushing in on Germany. Similarly, in the Pacific, which is the next slide. You know, this one doesn't show it quite as well, but the extent of the Japanese empire in August of 42, almost all over the Pacific, certainly China and Southeast Asia, the big squeeze. That is actually from Time magazine, July 3rd, 1944, be a little further along, but it shows you just how much progress had been made in 2 years. Think in your own life about how many of the things like you didn't do in 2 years, and you know, around the house or something like that. Look at what the US had been doing in 2 years. So there were realistic plans. If you want to go on to the next slide there, they were actually starting to get ready. You can go about getting ready for the they were not counting their chickens before they're hatched. But look what happened in the summer of 44. The GI Bill of Rights here in the US, the Bretton Woods Agreement, which restructured the world's international financial system. They were getting ready for the United Nations. You'll see the US, France, Soviet Union, and China. There's an interesting nation that isn't there. So things were happening such that people were starting to look towards the end of the war. Go to the next slide. Not everything was ready for the end of the war. You can look there. February 45, which is mentioned, is of course the Yalta Conference, and you know, were the Germans going to put up a defense when we started to get to Germany and stuff like that? You know, were the Soviets going to get involved in Japan, in the war in Japan? No one spoke about this, but everyone knew that the British and French couldn't keep it. A lot of stuff was unresolved, but there was serious discussion about how that this war might be ending with military actions. If we go to the next slide, which is my last slide here, the place where the war could end was what was going on in France. The two armies marching across France. They might be able to get into Germany late summer, into the fall of 45. If the war was going to end in the reasonable near future, one of these two choices to get into Germany was going to be the one. So the northern route, British Canadians, or the central route, the U.S. Third Army coming forward. That's the end of my slide presentation. But the movie begins with what seems like Hollywood hype. The war might be over by Christmas. That was not actual Hollywood hype. Very serious discussions at that time about we might be seeing light. There might be real serious light at the end of the tunnel here.
Okay, I'm just fussing here with this. So speak to something else in this. Well, I try to figure out why
The war in Europe, by the way, when I say the war might be over, clearly everyone knew that they were nowhere near Japan, but go ahead. So sorry about that. So yeah,
So while I'm getting the other slide deck brought back up, speak to the broad front theory versus the narrow front theory that came about in the strategic discussions with Eisenhower and the commanders.
The U.S. Army marching across France, the Third Army, led by the Third Army. It wasn't only the Third Army, but that was way ahead of where the British and Canadians were going up along the coast. So I think for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the Germans kept a large army at Calais, thinking the U.S. and British were going to come charging across the Channel, that Normandy was a ruse. So they ran into some obstacles there. That slowed things down. And the one slide on mine that I want to go too much back into is that the U.S. was really cutting straight across France, whereas the British and Canadians were slowly moving very deliberately up. In advance, a problem with the U.S. march across France was that they were outrunning their supply lines. They simply were running out of gas. To get from Normandy all the way up to almost the German border it was just extremely, I think for every 5 gallons of gas they could get to the front, it took 20 gallons in a truck, and whatever the numbers were. And then it was much easier to cut up there. And the question is, do you want to cut into Germany with an army that might be overextended? That would be the U.S. Army. Or do you want to even out the lines? I think that's sort of the gist of what you're getting at there. And
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So the two. This is, I don't want to cut into your. Maybe I'll lay the groundwork for your debate here. But the two leaders, Montgomery in the north and Patton/Bradley in the south, were both lobbying Eisenhower for their plans. Patton and Bradley wanted to keep going. Montgomery said, let's straighten out the lines. We can catch a fresh port up there in Antwerp and catch some bridges and go straight into sort of northern Germany there. So that's the outline of the debate. I didn't want to steal your thunder because I think you're going to take over from here. So
yeah, that was perfect, Greg. You and I were on the same page. And this is the beginning of what became a very antagonistic relationship between Montgomery in particular on the British side and Pat Hodges, who was the First Army commander, with Eisenhower trying to placate both sides, right? And that was, the Americans wanted this broad front. Let's all advance sort of in pace at the same time. And Montgomery comes up with this idea and finally gets Eisenhower to back it. And that's this Operation Market Garden, okay? And that was the idea. Here's the lines down here. Now, this map shows it's in error, actually. I just noticed that. It shows us we had taken the city of Antwerp, but we had not taken the long, I think, 30, 40 mile waterway from Antwerp to the ocean. The Germans still controlled that. So even though we had control of the port, it was of no use to us. And that was a big supply problem because everything was still coming over the beaches in Normandy. And, the distance to get the supplies from Normandy to the front just kept getting longer and longer. So Montgomery convinces Eisenhower to try this narrow front thrust, okay? And he calls it Operation Market Garden. 3 parachute divisions, 2 American and 1 British, along with a Polish brigade, are dropped along here. The 101st at 101st near Eindhoven, the 82nd near Nijmegen, and the Brits at Arnhem. Okay. And the idea was that they would lay a carpet. They say exactly that in the movie and in the book, this along here. And then the British 30 Corps, which was mostly a mechanized set of divisions, would then advance along this. The problem were there were 9 bridges that had to be taken. And the idea was if you could get up here to Arnhem, let me go back to this other map. If you could get up here and take Arnhem, then you could turn the German line, outflank them in the classic sort of sense of the word, and you were into the Ruhr, the German industrial center. And the idea was then the Germans could not, survive, could not fight on if we took their industrial center. So that was the strategy. That was the idea. However, the theory and the practice, diverged quickly. This is Montgomery. Obviously, we know him as the leader of the British forces and Canadian forces, right? And it was his plan that was put into place. Took a while to convince Eisenhower. Eisenhower finally went along. This is the American Supreme Command, obviously Ike in the middle, Patton on the left, and Bradley on the right. And Greg already mentioned how there was this dispute as to which of these armies to back, right? Bradley was actually an Army Group commander, whereas Patton was the 3rd Army commander. So he was underneath. Well, he was underneath Bradley in effect. And these 2 men, Bradley and Patton, were incredibly embittered by Eisenhower's decision to back Montgomery's Operation Market Garden. Okay. So let's get into some of the German side and bring in our German expert. Colin, who's this good-looking guy?
That is the unflappable Gerd von Rundstedt, Field Marshal Extraordinary, and someone Hitler respected but also loathed. So,
and what was his story? What happened? Why did he? What role did he play in all this?
Well, actually, Hitler had fired him a couple of times. After in 1940, he and Hitler had gotten into an argument with each other about the Dunkirk situation. And Hitler disagreed with von Rundstedt, and Rundstedt said, well, if you don't like my opinion, transfer me. So he fired him. Then he brought him back later and then fired him again. But at this point in time, he brought him back because Hitler had already dismissed some of the senior colonel generals and a couple of field marshals. Heinz Guderian had been fired again and people like that. So he had to bring competence back. So they brought him back, and he was in command of the Western Front. And he's the guy who decided that the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, which had just finished 3 years of fighting in the Soviet Union, needed a break. And in the film, it's very accurate. He actually is standing there at the map and says, let's put Wilhelm Beecher's panzer troops, in Arnhem for a rest and refit. And that made perfect sense because 3 new divisions were being created in Holland at that time because they were wiped out. And 1 new division from scratch was being built. And that was the 7th Fallschirmjäger Division. And that was being built from recruits and conscripts. A lot of them were Dutch, by the way. Most people don't realize that a full 22% of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, as it was being rebuilt, were Dutch conscripts and volunteers. They were not Germans.
How well did they fight as Dutch in the German forces?
They fought extremely well, to be honest. In fact, one of them, Gerardus Moyman, had joined voluntarily at the age of 16 and earned the Knight's Cross at age 17 for destroying several tanks with Panzerfaust and taking out some machine gun positions on the Eastern Front. So some of the Dutch soldiers were actually so good, they created 2 Dutch SS divisions, giving them their own status.
Wow. That's something I always learn something new from you, Colin, and that's new for me. So quite by accident, this very powerful, although somewhat being rebuilt 2nd Panzer Corps or second Panzer Corps is put right there at Arnhem, where Montgomery has decided to pivot, take that bridge at Arnhem and pivot east.
Just bad luck.
Bad luck on our part. Good luck on the German part. And then here's another map showing this. Okay. So again, for those of you not familiar, you got the British Second Army here, 3 corps, but the key corps was Harrach's 30th Corps that was going to charge right up this, unfortunately, narrow, 2-lane, sometimes 1-lane road, right? Over land that is, how would you characterize, Ken, you've been there, how would you characterize the geography or the topography of this area here?
Actually, I wasn't on the road, but just from what they say in the movie, you know, they blamed the failure of the mission on the width of the highway. It was backed up for forever. So
Colin, have you been to this area?
I have. In fact, there's a nice little hotel on that road, and when I wore my 101st Airborne hat, I never bought a drink. It was great. And but no, he's right. It was basically mainly a 1-lane road. Well, it would be the equivalent of about 1 lane of one of our highways, about 10 feet wide, and it was a straight shot for about 15, 20 miles, slow curves. But the problem was, and this was total, and Browning had warning of this, and he ignored it. But 2 weeks before, they had put the 2nd SS Panzer Corps there in the Arnhem area to refit. They were rebuilding these new units. They had a German army anti-tank unit that was training new recruits there. And how they were training them was they were setting targets up on the fields across that road. The 75 millimeter PaK-40s were still sitting there with some 88s where they had been for training purposes when 30 Corps was going up that road.
Yeah. So let's just bring in another name here. This is Harrach's, played by Michael Caine in the movie. Do I have that right, Ken? I think that's the guy.
yes.
Charge of 30 Corps, long-time British veteran, very well respected. A lot skinnier and not near as good looking as Michael Caine, but an accomplished commander.
No, Edward Fox played Horrocks. Caine played Joe Vandeleur.
Who played? Well, let's not get into that. I thought who played Montgomery?
I don't remember who played Montgomery. I don't remember Montgomery being in the movie.
Bernard Montgomery. He wasn't in the movie. Okay, well, we'll play that game later. Anyway, this is a very accurate portrayal of the type of vehicle which Harrach's was in as they advanced up this narrow road. So I just thought it was interesting. It's very much like the vehicle they show in the movie, right? And here's a couple of pictures of them trying to advance up this road. Narrow, and I guess the other point I wanted to emphasize, crisscrossed by, as you see in this map, crisscrossed by so many canals and rivers, because this is, low marshy land. Right. This is where during World War I, parts of these places is where, the men fought in mud up to their knees most of the time. So the difficulty was advancing up this narrow road. And obviously the Germans could easily defend that. And they did so quite well. So maybe now is a time to stop, because the 3 or 4 of us have been talking and talking before we get into the actual tactical operations. Let me just stop for a minute and see if there's any questions or any comments in the chat room, Sean, that we should address. Bring in the audience. Anybody like to make a comment or ask a question?
I don't see anything in the chat question-wise. Any raised hands here?
Actually, I did see something in the chat. Doug Dorr, I think you mentioned earlier that the V1 and V2 sites were actually on the coast there, and they were starting to bombard England. So that was a factor in determining this sort of, give Montgomery the push to get those out of the way. So that was, not a trivial factor. That was the first time since 1940 that the British civilians had been bombed. Thanks for that comment. I think that was very, very important. So.
And I did see somebody with a hand up.
It's actually Rich.
Paul.
Yes, Rich.
Yeah, it's not Paula. That's my wife.
Sorry.
I don't watch combat movies. I didn't fight in Vietnam, but that's my error, 69 to 73. After watching The Deer Hunter, that was it for me. However, as a clinical psychologist, I now do a lot of research on combat trauma. So at some point, I want to know what really happens. What's the morale like? What are the injuries? How many citizens are killed? At some point, that's where I want to go with this. I'm not watching movies.
It's a good point. I mean, so you have not watched Operation Market Garden?
No, not at all. The last one was The Deer Hunter, and it was just too stressful to watch it. So after that, I resigned from any movies because they're not reality. They're an illusion of what reality is. I deal in reality as a clinical psychologist.
So Rich, Colin, Ken, or Greg, comment please. I highly recommend you watch this movie from your psychiatrist's point of view. It really is an anti-war movie, and it does very much show the.
Well, I think all movies should be anti-war, given all the damage that's done and how many citizens are killed.
Yeah, not all are. This one very much is.
I think that's reality.
And I think was portrayed that way.
Okay.
I don't know, Colin or Greg, any comment on that?
All right.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
So suspension of disbelief. These are all movies, right? Robert Redford didn't shoot anybody. He was sitting in a trailer when the day was done and these guys were in the bar and having pints and whatever. But Cornelius Rhine wanted to present this story. It's important that Cornelius Rhine wrote the book. It's just equally important Joseph E. Levine made a movie. But these are all movies. It's 2 hours usually. This was almost 3 hours. But they're telling a story. And for generations going forward, they need to know this. They need to know what happened. What better way to do it? People aren't going to read Cornelius Rhine's book. They have a better shot at watching the movie. So
I think the World War II PTSD movie to watch is Best Years of Our Lives. That shows three guys coming home, and I think that really shows the struggles that they had, and what they really went through. And that's only a year or two after the war, and it didn't follow it fair enough over generations, but it does show it wasn't all. It was a serious issue in their lives. Yeah.
I think the two best anti-war movies to watch from the enemy's perspective on the futility of the endeavor is Das Boot and Cross of Iron.
Das Boot, heartily agree. The other one I have not watched. This movie, the final scene, Rich, illustrates, I would say, portrays the absolute futility of war. And it shows the disaster that happened to Arnhem and the British troops who were surrounded, et cetera, et cetera. And the final scene is so well portrayed as a tragedy of war that, I can see why you would say, I don't want to watch any more of this because it's too hard to watch. My view is, as a non-military guy, a guy who never came close to combat, never came close to the military other than through my family, is that us civilians need to watch these movies because at least it gives us some idea of the tragedy of war and what happens. It's not nowhere close to the reality. It's probably 1,000 times worse, but it gives you some ideas of it.
Well, I
ones that are
appreciate
well
your,
done.
yeah, I appreciate your input.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts before we charge forward here?
Wait, Brad Washbaugh?
Oh, Brad?
Yes. Now I'm wondering, during the planning phase, it seems like there was such an intelligence gap with the location of the German SS unit, the terrain, and so many factors. Did they actually war game this strategy of market garden? It seems to be flawed and right from the beginning in gathering of intelligence and just the risk involved given the mode of operation they were planning. Can somebody talk about that?
Yeah, they had 7 days to plan the mission. There was no wargaming involved.
No, no. And they chose to ignore some of the intelligence. Why? They had created this airborne corps. They had wanted to use it for several weeks before. They had planned other operations, but as the movie says, Patton and the First Army were moving so fast, they kept overrunning the objectives. Finally, this came up, and it was kind of like an embarrassment of riches. It's like somebody who won the lottery and $1 billion. They just can't wait to go spend it. Here, they had these resources, and they wanted to prove a point. I think Montgomery and the other higher command wanted to prove a point that they could use these troops effectively and end the war quickly. But they did it out of hubris rather than any analytical, thoughtful strategy.
But you know, if the 2nd SS Panzer Corps hadn't been deposited there 2 weeks earlier, it would have worked.
You know, it's like my comment about somebody asked me about, hey, how was London? Was it really cool? I said, I loved London. The only problem was that all those tourists were there. They got in my way. Slowed it down. Okay, let's go back.
Wait, does Al Smith have a hand up? So
Al.
Yeah, quick question. Did the weather ever play any factor for or against the Allies in this whole operation?
Yeah, Ken?
The fog. They couldn't get the Polish troops into Arnhem because of the fog. And that's Gene Hackman played the Polish general. And there's one scene I like to call the blame game when the generals are on the rooftop, they're looking at surmising the situation, and they each state why they blame it. And I believe it was Browning blamed it on the fog in England because they couldn't get Hackman's Polish paratroopers to Arnhem in time. So to answer your question, yes. And also, Glenn, appreciate this. When Cook is doing the river crossing and the tanks have laid down the smoke, it's a windy morning. And the wind takes all the smoke out, so these poor guys are in daylight crossing the Wall River. So I would say to Al, yes, the weather did have impact.
So it's just to continue the story for a few minutes here. So the first ground objective is the bridges just north of Eindhoven. This is the 101st Airborne Division's objectives. Several bridges here to be taken. You might note this little town or village of Wegel, and footnote is that was the objective, or near there was the objective of the 501st Parachute Regiment, of which Easy Company, the Band of Brothers, was involved there. And there's a great episode in the Band of Brothers about their attempt to take Wegel and actually thrown out of Wegel there. I can't remember which episode it is, but it's very well done, right? This is General Taylor suiting up, getting ready to hop on the airplane and go to Operation Market Garden. These are some of the classic pictures. You see it also in Band of Brothers. This was a daylight jump, which was considered very risky at the time. If you remember, all the other previous jumps, especially Normandy, were night jumps, right? But by this point, you know, that we've largely defeated the German Luftwaffe. We weren't too worried about the Luftwaffe rising up to shoot down these transport planes. I think just some great photos of these guys jumping from the planes. And once they jump, well, this is actually the British heading up the road. And let's go back to the German side. Colin, who's this fella?
This is my old pen pal, Obergruppenführer Lieutenant General Wilhelm Dietrich, who was kind enough to sign a photo for me back when I was in high school. And he was very forthcoming with his perspective of the battle, and he even called the entire operation perfection from a foolish perspective, because he thought that the British and Americans knew that his Panzer Corps was there. He had no idea. They didn't know. And but he did. We exchanged letters for about 2 years before he died, and he was a very interesting guy. In fact, something about Dietrich you need to know. In the film, one thing they did not show was when Dietrich gave the order that all seriously wounded Allied prisoners, meaning British, were to be treated ahead of German soldiers who were lightly wounded. Even his SS soldiers, triage was to be applied, and his division surgeon, Sturmbannführer Major Egon Schalke, said, "Yes, sir, I'll do this." And Schalke went to all the senior officers, including John Frost, and had them attest to a letter to his humane treatment of them, because he had a pretty good idea what might happen when the war was over.
Interesting. Already positioning for what happens when they lose.
And by the way, Dietrich stood up to Heinrich Himmler and called him an idiot to his face and told him in 1941, executing partisans, Jews as partisans, his quote in my book, Anti-Partisan Warfare, was very astute. He said, "Heinrich is a fool. If he thinks that this is going to basically ingratiate us with the population, he's lost his mind. I mean, he's totally lost it." And Himmler hated Dietrich, hated him. But Hitler loved Dietrich because he was effective.
I'm going to jump ahead a couple of slides here, Colin, just because we got to be careful of the time here. And this good-looking fellow with the eyeglasses.
Yeah, that's Lieutenant General Hans Wolfgang Reinhardt. He was in command of all German Wehrmacht forces for the replenishment, meaning the recruitment and training of German forces in Holland. And it was his guys who were on the guns that basically stopped 30 Corps.
Yeah.
Now, this is Brigadeführer Major General SS Heinz Harmel, who achieved that rank at age 37, a two-star general at age 37. And he was in command of 10th SS Division Hohenstaufen. But the day of the jump, he was in Germany. He got there the next day. He drove all night and all day to get there. And in the movie, you see Hardy Kruger playing a General Ludwig, who didn't exist. I don't know who the hell he is. And he's talking to Maximilian Schell playing Wilhelm Dietrich, and they're talking about the ceasefire operation. That would have been Heinz Harmel, not a fictional General Ludwig.
What was the attitude? What was the morale among the Germans at this time?
Among the SS, the morale was very high for two reasons. First of all, they had already done a successful they just came out of the Soviet Union and they got wiped out. They had a 17,000 man corps that was reduced to about 6,000 guys, but they had killed over 100,000 Soviet soldiers. So they felt they did a pretty good job. So they were there to rest, refit, reconstitute, train, recruit, and build up their force. And they were doing it from a lot of the Dutch volunteers, they're called the Freiwilligen. And they were bringing those guys up to speed, training them. And Harmel was there. He was supposed to get there 2 days after, on the 19th, 20th, my mistake, September 20th, he was supposed to be there to oversee the recruitment. But the day of the jump, he got word of it. So he jumped into his Kubelwagen, and he and his driver just hauled ass to Holland right away. Then he took over command of the division.
What was the difference in terms of the effectiveness and the morale factor at this point in the war between the SS and the regular German army?
It depends. I've interviewed over 50 SS guys, the last 12 surviving generals, and they all had varying opinions. All of them knew the war was going to be lost eventually, but most of them felt that if they could stop the Soviet advance long enough, and if the Americans or British could come into a truce negotiation, that the war might end on a more benevolent plane for the German military. Some of the senior SS guys like Karl Wolff and Otto Kuhm and people like that, they were totally not blinded by reality. They knew the war was over, and they knew that a lot of guys were going to be stepping into a noose when it was done.
Yeah. Let's get
a real quick interjection here for the audience. Colin, an SS person had to be a member of the Nazi Party, right?
No.
Oh, Did not know that. Okay.
No, you did not have to be a member of the party. In fact, only 40-something% of the SS officers were members of the party. But to be a field grade officer, major or above, party membership was highly looked upon as a favorable promotion tool, so to speak. But all the generals, if you were going to be promoted to general, Hitler made you a member of the party.
Okay.
So this is the next objective, Nijmegen. And this is the 82nd Airborne, which drops. You see this little part here, they actually drop very close to the border of Germany here. They drop south of Nijmegen. The bridge they need to take is over the wall here. So they have to fight their way. There's other bridges they have to take and get up to Nijmegen. Some great stories here. I'm going to jump. This is General Gavin, 37, did we say? 37, 38 years old. He had already made, jumps from beginning in, I don't know if it was North Africa or Sicily was his first jump, but had been, had made 4 or 5 jumps previous to this. They called him the jumping general. And he has a great autobiography that he wrote. I think it's On the Road to Berlin, which I read.
On to Berlin, yeah.
On to Berlin, yeah. Which I highly recommend reading. It's just very well done, right?
By the way, Gavin told me during my interview with him, he said Montgomery was a pompous idiot.
Geez, I wonder why. Maybe because anyway. So I want to tell quickly here because the story of this man. This is Julian Cook, played by Robert Redford in the movie. West Point graduate, 1940. Had been part of the 82nd Airborne since its inception, risen to, at this point, battalion commander. And he is given the job, and it's so well portrayed in the movie, and so, I think, pretty accurately portrayed in the movie, of taking his battalion over the Wall River here, okay, to cross the Wall River, to take, actually not the Nijmegen Bridge, but the railroad bridge, and then the Nijmegen Bridge, okay? That's part is a little bit inaccurate in the movie, but it doesn't matter much. This is often called Mini Omaha Beach because it was very much like storming Omaha Beach. They showed them waiting and waiting. They're waiting for hours and hours. They were going to do it at night at first. Then it turned out, because of the wait so long, to get these pitiful little boats delivered by the British convoy up that narrow road. These are collapsible boats. This is actually one of them in a museum somewhere near Nijmegen. They finally get these boats, and then this is a shot from the movie. They jump into these boats. Cook leads the first company across. As I think Ken said earlier, originally there was a big smoke screen that had been laid down that covered this. The wind shifts, smoke screen's blown away, and these boats, I think 18 or 20 of them, are naked in the river halfway across, not even halfway across, and the Germans open fire. And you can imagine the casualties that take place. During the movie, and accurately so, Cook is shown, paddling across, and he's repeating. He was Catholic, apparently a very devout Catholic, and he was repeating the Hail Mary over and over and over again. Colin, you look like you want to say something there. No?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm just amazed at your clarity of vision on this subject.
I've watched that scene 100 times. I've read everything I can on it. What was really fascinating is that these boats make it across. Those that do make it across, they're dispatched. Just like sort of at Omaha Beach, these guys run up the shore of the river. Luckily, the German defenses on the ground were not that significant in depth. It was more the mortar fire and the artillery fire and some of the machine gun fire coming. You're shaking your head, Colin. Do I have that wrong?
No, you got it absolutely right. The reason why they made it across effectively was because all the people firing out them were fresh recruits who had no real weapons training.
Yeah. And they take out the Germans. What's really fascinating is that, that's part of the way the movie is a little inaccurately portrayed. they were actually rowed across by a combat engineer battalion. That combat engineer battalion then lands the first wave of men, turns around, takes the boats back, and make, I think, 4 or 5 crossings to get the entire battalion across. So talk about heroes. They were not portrayed that way in the movie just because, it's a movie. But they do land. They do take out the German positions along the shore here, the sort of mini Omaha Beach, if you will. And then the movie very accurately shows them taking first this railway bridge and then the other side. Now, this also, Colin or Greg or anybody help me with this. This is where the Germans had planned to blow up the Nijmegen Bridge, but are not able to do so. What happened there?
Yeah, what happens was Heinz Harmel's guys, he put a demolition crew on there. They put the equivalent of about 600 pounds of TNT on the bridge. But the problem was the caps they were using and the material had been in boxes for like 2 years. And they might have been weather dampened, damaged, or whatever, but the explosion never took place. But not that it really mattered because the advance never went beyond that. But yeah, that's just what happened. It was just bad luck on their part. Good luck for the Americans.
Yeah. So it's already after 8 o'clock, Sean. Should we take a quick station break?
Sure thing. Let's do that. Glenn, I will stop your share.
Yep.
And I will go ahead and share my screen. And we will thank our sponsors here. Do a quick station break. First up to thank, as always, is Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. If you smoke and you'd like to quit, they have a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and you can also check out all programs that they have on offer at their website, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. We'd also like to thank UPMC for Life for sponsoring the VBC. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all of your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. We have a free quarterly magazine, which many of you probably already get or have. If you are new to the program and do not receive the magazine, it's because we don't have your address. You can easily send that to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org, or just pop it into the chat to me. Let me know that you'd like a copy. If you'd like 10 copies, 25 copies, 100 copies, let us know. We'll send you a box, and then you can feel free to hand them out at your local community centers or wherever you go, the barbershop. But this will be our next issue. It has gone to the printer. I personally love this cover. I think it's amazing. It draws the eye. You can find, over 100 words here, and I'm sure that we will get a lot of conversations started simply from this magazine. So this will be heading the mailboxes probably within a few short weeks, if not next week. And we have a survey. I will put that into the chat. The link takes about 2 to 3 minutes to complete. Lets us know how we're doing, and we always watch these very closely. So please let us know how you thought of what you thought of the program this evening. And it's a very short survey. Coming up next Monday, this is a little bit of a different program for Monday night. One, we're going to start earlier. It's going to start actually at 6 p.m. You see 5:30 there. That's because downtown Pittsburgh Market Square is an Oktoberfest, and we are partnering with AE Works, and we're going to present a VBC program down at the Oktoberfest, but we're also live streaming it, which is why I will be here in the Zoom room helping out with the live stream starting at 6 p.m. I believe it'll go to roughly 7:30. So plan on that for Monday night. It's a different thing that we're going to try, but we'd love to see some of you in the Zoom room if you're not able to make it down to Market Square for Oktoberfest. But that's going to be our Monday night program. We have an in-person breakfast on the following, on Tuesday. That'll be in McCandless at Ridgecrest Senior Living and Memory Care. Looking forward to that breakfast. And then next week, we're going to do Black Week with Glenn back on October 10th. So our in-person will be that morning on that Thursday. I said Tuesday. So Thursday morning in person, Thursday night back here with Glenn for our normally scheduled Greatest Generation Live program. And that is our announcements for this evening.
Just real quick, the Oktoberfest, the program is going to specialize on veterans who served in Germany during the Cold War, right? Because it's an Oktoberfest. Is that the topic of the Oktoberfest?
Yeah, that's the hope. You always, you're always hoping that you get the veterans that are going to show up to an in-person and talk with them about that topic. I assume that there will be. So yes, we'll plan for that. And then we'll see how it goes once we're on stage, as they say.
Okay.
Back to you, Glenn.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Let me get this back up. Now, we haven't gotten to the real tragic part yet. And that's here at Arnhem, right? Which was the last bridge, the bridge that ends up being a bridge too far. There it is. It's not working so well. This is where the British Paratroop Division was dropped and the Polish Parachute Brigade. Unfortunately, you see these landing zones here. So this is Arnhem here. This is the bridge that needs to be taken. But there weren't any, it's a fairly dense urban area, and there weren't any landing zones, close enough. The biggest landing zone being out here. So the problem for the British and then the Poles is they had to land fairly far away and then march and then end up having to fight their way through this urban area all the way to the bridge. And the issue is that very few of those troops make it to the bridge. The man that makes it is this guy. Colin, tell us about this man.
You mean Colonel Frost?
Colonel Frost. Is this him? Do I have the right picture?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he was the man. Okay, he was the man. And he had a great career even before this. He'd been a commando, he joined the Paras. I met him in 1984 in London. We went to the pub. I bought the pints. He was a fascinating study, and he was such a humble guy. It was stunning to know all he had accomplished. But he was a very unassuming character. You would have never thought that he was this great hero who actually faced down one of the toughest, divisions, corps in the German military. And he was a wonderful guy. He really was. I liked him. He was personable. He told jokes. I can't repeat them here because he was colorful, but he was just a really wonderful person. And I really admired him a lot.
Yeah. And how many troops was he able to get to the bridge?
I'm not sure how many he got to the bridge. I know that 10,000 managed to creep into Arnhem, and of course they lost 8 to being killed, wounded, and captured. I think he had about 600, about a battalion that managed to secure the bridge, and that was when Harmel and Beatrice offered to accept their surrender. And then in the movie, it's depicted accurately that the British officer says, "We don't have the facilities to take you all prisoner because, and that was, considered arrogant by Beatrice, I guess, and Harmel, but it's kind of funny.
So Frost and his battalion, 600 men, take only the northern side of the bridge. If you can see where my cursor is right here, they're housed right in here. The rest of the division never makes it actually to the bridge. They're out here in Oosterbeek, if I have the pronunciation anywhere near right. Again, north of the river, but they're isolated there and eventually surrounded by the Germans. And they're surrounded with, this is the British general in charge, played so well by Sean Connery, Roy Urquhart. Do I have that name pronounced anywhere near right, Colin?
Urquhart.
Urquhart, all right. And he's standing in front of this famous building. Was it the Hartenstein Hotel? Was it?
Yeah, the Hartenstein Hotel.
There it is in its modern version, right?
Yeah, that was formerly Field Marshal Modell's headquarters.
Yeah. So the movie portrays it so well, and I found this shot of Major Digby Totham Warder. This is from the movie, and it was this great scene, Colin, which you described a little bit. Why don't you give him a little deeper background on what he's doing here?
Yeah, this actually happened. This is 100% factual. The aide to Wilhelm Beatrice came out and was offering terms of surrender, and
having the white flag here.
Yeah, even the Matthias Kreuzer was his name, and he walks out with the flag, and there was a miscommunication, I guess, because and that's when Anthony Hopkins' character playing Frost says, "Tell him to go to hell." John Frost said he actually said that. He actually said, "Tell him to go to hell," and that's when Waters said, "We don't have the facilities to take you." And what's not in the movie is the fact that Matthias goes back and tells Beatrice that they apparently don't want to surrender. And that's when Beatrice says, well, that will be their folly, destroy Arnhem. And so that was kind of a tragic state of affairs.
Yeah. And the Germans do, in fact, destroy Arnhem. And there you see a shot of Arnhem on the north side of the river near the bridge. And the movie just shows it depicts it so well and so tragically as these German tanks crush in on what's left of Frost's battalion.
By the way, just so you know, Beatrice was brought up on charges for crimes against humanity until it was proven that he had no participation in the Holocaust. Then the prosecutors at Nuremberg said, well, we can prosecute him for destroying Arnhem because that was a civilian area. But his defense lawyer argued that, yes, but there were British paratroopers in those buildings under the Geneva Convention 1929. Once you take a civilian location and turn it into a military defensive or offensive facility, it loses its protection in international law. So he was found not guilty.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So the Germans end up taking a huge percentage. I don't know what, probably 2/3 of the British Parachute Division and the Polish Brigade prisoner.
80%.
80%. All right. One of the worst defeats of the British, in Europe after D-Day. In fact, the worst defeat of the British. Right. And back to Rich's point, the movie just portrays the tragedy of what happened to these men. That they were caught in this pincer. There was virtually nothing they could do. So many of them were mowed down uselessly. And then finally, thousands of them surrender.
By the way, one other factor, Beatrice had in Arnhem the local priest for the Catholic parish was there. And Beatrice actually asked him, didn't tell him, he asked him, would you please go and give last rites to these brave British soldiers because they at least deserve that. And that's not in the movie, but it's very important.
Yeah, yeah. There's also a very interesting scene in the movie about the truce that is called the 2 or 3 hour temporary hold in the fighting to evacuate the wounded, which Beatrice agrees to, surprising his other subordinate generals.
Yeah, Harmel was not in favor of the ceasefire because he felt that would buy time for reinforcements to supply the British with more manpower to take the rest of the bridge and cross totally into Arnhem. Beatrice, in his letter to me in 1979, stated that he said that I told Harmel and Hartzer, who was commanding the 9th SS Panzer Division, I told them that we are gentlemen in a war of attrition. We are not animals in a war of destruction.
There's also an element of the movie that we haven't talked about, don't have the time to, can't show it. The movie portrays the point of view from the Dutch citizens pretty well as well. Laurence Olivier plays a doctor who gets involved in this with who's the woman that is the widow who owns the building, the structure, Colin?
The actress is Lieve Ullmann. I don't remember her name in the historically.
Yeah.
Kate Van der Horst.
That's it. There you go. Wow. What a memory, Colin. And it just portrays the humanity involved in the middle of this terrible battlefield. So I don't know. I urge people to watch the movie. It can be a hard movie to watch at times, but it does just a beautiful job of portraying what happened. Beautiful is probably the wrong word to use. And again, it is an anti-war movie, as all movies should be, but it certainly ends on a very tragic note. Yes. Rich? Sean, can you unmute Rich? Mine.
There you go.
I got it. So tell me about the casualties among the Allies, and particularly based on my extensive clinical research on combat trauma, tell me about the morale afterwards, and tell me about the extent of their moral injuries, which often does not get addressed.
I actually didn't come prepared with any numbers on the casualties. They are significant,
Okay.
right? Particularly among the British and the Polish
Yeah.
paratroopers involved. And I would characterize that element of the battle, which you're asking about, as equal to any other World War II battle. It was ferocious. It had its many inhuman elements to it and qualities to it, like any battle during any war. So yeah, it was bad. I don't know. Colin, you have a thought on that?
I'm pulling it up right now. I'm pulling it up on the website that I use for our World War II archives.
While you're doing that, can you look up citizens who were wounded, injured, killed? Because in Vietnam, a lot of citizens were killed. Not just wounded, were killed.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me. What I'm looking at right now,
that's fine,
is wounded and missing total was 17,000. British alone was 13,226.
Wow.
The British division was completely destroyed. Less than 2,000 were alive to be captured. 1,500 by the time those died of wounds. Glider pilots lost 7,578, including their passengers. And the total dead and wounded and missing of the RAF alone was 7,872. The British 8th and 12th Corps under 30 Corps lost 1,480. The 8th and 12th Corps, following that, lost another 3,874. The 82nd Airborne Division, well, the 101st Airborne Division lost 2,118. The 82nd Airborne Division, let's see, that was Max Taylor's Operation 101st. 3,974 82nd Airborne Division soldiers killed. And yeah, so that was the Allied losses right there. And the German losses were between 7,500 and 10,000 men. It's totally unknown because the Germans did not really have a way of retrieving a lot of their dead beyond Arnhem, Eindhoven, Nijmegen. So, and Dutch civilian casualties, he says, less than 500 civilians killed, but no one knows with any certainty.
Wow.
But right now, it looks like wounded or missing civilians, the numbers are as high as 10,000 total.
Yeah, I would expect that.
So that's what I have.
Thank you.
The impact of this is an Allied loss, if you will, okay, a strategic loss. It totally negates the idea of the narrow thrust, and instead Eisenhower now makes his point, and we then pursue the broad front strategy in advance. But it also, this is now end of September, going into October, it creates stalemate for the most part on the Western Front. And then the absolute tragedy of this, beyond that, is that because the Allied armies now pivot and turn east towards the German border, the rest of Holland is left occupied by the Germans for the rest of the war. Arnhem, Oosterbeek, all the rest of Holland. And it's a terrible winter for the Dutch. many of them starving to death. Among them, one famous movie actress by the name of Audrey Hepburn.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yep.
Hmm.
By the way, Audrey Hepburn's underground unit of 25 resistance fighters saved over 100 Allied airmen from German capture, just so you know that.
Wonderful.
So that is the story. I don't know, Greg or Ken, any other comments on the story?
Well, one of the things I would say is I think Al Smith has a hand up, so let's maybe see.
Okay.
Do you have a question, Al?
Yeah, how do I say this? Who took responsibility for this? Who was reprimanded? Was anyone made the fall guy? What was the outcome in terms of people losing rank or position or whatever? Who made the mistake?
I'll take a shot at that. Nobody had any consequences that I'm aware of. No one was demoted, no one was court-martialed, no one, all that. Who made the mistake? I think you can point to Montgomery and the other senior Allied commanders. Some people blamed Eisenhower for agreeing to let Montgomery try this.
It was Eisenhower's call. He made the call, so he would have to take the hit.
Okay.
But there was no real repercussion. The other outcome of it is after this, Eisenhower and Montgomery are at odds ends against each other, to the point where by the time of the Battle of the Bulge and some things that happened that Montgomery said after the Battle of the Bulge, Eisenhower basically told the senior British commanders, the name is escaping me at the moment, I can't work with this man anymore. Either he goes or I go.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first sort of piece of that puzzle that fell into place subsequently over the next few months. And it was only by the bare skin of his teeth that Montgomery survived and was kept in place.
Well,
And eventually, Eisenhower, unlike Ike, becomes president, and he warns people about the dangers of war.
Yeah.
Eventually, it happens.
Very true. Very true.
one thing of interest is when I interviewed Jim Gavin, he told me that had Browning not sat on the intelligence of the German armor being in the area, they would have postponed that to confirm the strength of German armored units and who those units were through the Dutch resistance. Browning never informed any of the American generals what he knew from the photo reconnaissance aircraft. He didn't tell anybody. He sat on it. And he basically said, well, these must not be important vehicles. Apparently, you think a couple of SS Panzer divisions might be something you might want to reconsider.
I think if you really wanted to point to somebody on the ground who could have changed the outcome of this, it was Browning. It was Browning who ignored the intelligence. Why did he ignore the intelligence? Because simple as he wanted to make his mark. He believed he was right. He believed this could be done. And he ignored the intelligence.
I agree. I agree.
On the civilian side, I think this came up in the chat several times. Colin and Glenn and Ken probably certainly know more about this than I do. But many of those small towns in Belgium and Holland have annual commemorations of this, and they celebrate the U.S., British, Canadian, Polish people who came in, and they to this day, it's not even every 5-10 years; it's just every year they have a ceremony honoring these people. I think isn't that the case?
I've understood the same thing, Greg. We had a Dutch major on a couple of years ago who wrote a book about 3 101st Airborne paratroopers that he got to know. They were still alive at the time. Can't remember his name right now. It's been too long. But I talked to him a lot, and he used to tell me the same thing, that you want to come over to have a good time, come over in September, October in Holland, and wear an American hat. And like Colin said, you won't have to buy yourself any beers.
Not only that, you don't have to find a date very hard either.
My wife might object to that one, but anyway.
I was divorced and single. I didn't care.
Anybody else with thoughts or comments on tonight's program? Sean, do you see any comments or anything we should address?
I see Colonel Don Patton.
Don?
And Barbara.
I'll-
Don, you're unmuted.
I'll make one comment. One of our 100th Bomb Group veterans was, he made the comment that one of his proudest moments was an operation called Chowhound, where the 8th Air Force dropped foodstuff because the Germans had basically starved the civilians. And I think he actually did 3 missions to drop food to the civilians.
It's nicely portrayed at the very end of Masters of the Air, the Masters of the Air series. The Chowhound runs. Yeah. Someone else had a comment? Thank you, Don.
Barbara?
This is Bob's certificate for being the lead veteran over the Oversteek Bridge in Nijmegen. They have a nightly sunset march throughout 365 days a year, and you never know who's going to join the crowd at sunset to walk the almost mile-long bridge, and then you finish at the memorial at the foot of the bridge. At the wall crossing, and he led it on September 15th while we were there. We were in Belgium, Netherlands for 19 days, and we saw many, many villages and ceremonies, and it was just so great. I always travel with American flags on sticks and friendship bracelets, and people come up, "You're American, can I take your picture?" They are so wonderful. They're so grateful for the Allies, for their liberation. It's just so heartwarming. I wish all Americans could to experience it because it's just amazing how much we're appreciated.
I think it would make most Americans realize how wonderfully welcomed we are by the people who really matter.
Yes, especially the Margraten Cemetery and other cemeteries that adopt each grave. It's so amazing. We went to a grave yesterday in Cleveland, Ohio, honoring one of our locals who was killed at Oosterhout at age 19. Private John Toll Medal of Honor recipient, if you would like to look him up. And you could hardly read his grave site, his grave marker, because it was so overgrown. And so Bob was picking the grass away before he took photos. But yeah, in the European cemeteries, they cherish their freedom and the Allies who provided it for them. It's just a marvelous, marvelous time to be there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for volunteering that.
Yes, sir.
I'll give you just a little insight. So we finished this trip to England, and we've immediately begun planning a trip to the European battlefields next late August, September, including this part, the Arnhem area. So you'll be hearing more about that as we finalize the plans, but that'll be next late August and September of next year.
Count me in.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. And I want to thank everybody for being on. If we're finished, unless anybody's got anything else.
One more thing, if I may, sir. One more thing. So it is also evident in every village that children learn about their history and their appreciation for the Allies. At the end of the wall crossing on September 20th that we saw the reenactment of, there was a giant ceremony with dignitaries at the foot of the bridge, and 60 preteen students performed a dance, including getting shot as if they were in the boats, and the 82nd Airborne Corps sang with them. They knew the Star Spangled Banner with the chorus, and it's just every village, the kids appreciate our allies as well, or their allies. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. So, Sean, I think we're done. It's the witching hour.
Yes.
Everybody for being on tonight. It's great to be back on air. And I know I'll be back next Thursday, and we've got these other programs coming up as well, as Sean recounted for us.
Yes, tons of programs. Check the Veterans Breakfast Club website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. Lots of in-persons coming up, lots of great programs Monday nights and Thursday nights. So hope to see you all soon. Thank you all for being here.
What did you like about?
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, and thanks, Ken, Greg, and Colin, so very much.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks.
Thank you, gents.